This is the history of Rome. In the beginning, we find ourselves beside the Tiber River in central Italy, where legend has it that a she-wolf suckled twin boys who would grow up to become the founders of Rome. It's obviously a myth, or perhaps a metaphor for how wild and uncivilized Italy was at the time. But the story captures something crucial about Rome's identity. In 753 BC, the settlement would have been tiny. The surrounding area, however, was inhabited by several Italian tribes. These people were what we might call Proto-Italians. They spoke an early form of Latin, and they lived in small independent communities. The Latins, the Etruscans, and the Greeks had established themselves along Italy's coast, while the Umbrians, the Samnites, and others populated the interior. The Mediterranean world at this point was dominated by the mighty empires of Greece and Persia. The Phoenicians controlled the sea lanes, and nearby Carthage was emerging as a major power. After the Romans had defeated their neighbors, built their city walls, and settled in, the next question was, how should they be ruled? To answer this, they borrowed the Greek concept of a polis, a fortified community led by a government of elected officials. This new type of political structure was called the Republic. Originally, only a few hundred men could participate in politics, but slowly more and more citizens were allowed to vote. Women still couldn't, though. As Rome grew in power, it needed a bigger army. At first, it relied on mercenaries, but soon started conquering neighboring Italian territories and forced entire populations into military service. The Italian League was formed. Its member states supplied Rome with soldiers. Slaves captured during warfare provided labor. The spoils of war also brought gold and silver to Rome, which funded further expansion. Rome's ambitions inevitably clashed with those of Carthage. Between 264 and 241 BC, 3 wars were fought, known collectively as the Punic Wars. Rome won control of the western Mediterranean and most of Sicily, but the wars nearly bankrupted the state. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Rome controlled all of Italy. But outside of Italy, another power was rising. It was a Celtic tribe located in the region we today call France. The Gauls were fierce fighters who had united under the leadership of one man, Vercingetorix. So Rome sent in one of its most famous generals, Julius Caesar. He battled the Gauls for 8 years and crushed their resistance. As a reward, he was granted land in Gaul and was made proconsul, which meant he didn't have to follow the rules. He farmed out the land to loyal followers, pillaged enemy cities, and had senators put to death without trial. Caesar was violating the very laws that had made Rome great. In 49 BC, the Senate ordered Caesar to return home and stand trial for his crimes. But instead, he gathered an army and marched toward Rome. Before crossing the Rubicon River, a border that marked the boundary between his province and Italy, Caesar supposedly said, "The die is cast." He had made his choice, and so had Rome. Civil war was inevitable. Caesar's opponents, the Optimates, were supported by the Roman Senate. Caesar's supporters, the populares, drew strength from the common people. Most of the fighting took place in Italy and Greece, where both sides assembled armies. Caesar proved to be a brilliant commander and was victorious against Pompey the Great, his chief rival in the Senate. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered. Caesar's triumphal procession through Rome in 45 BC was the greatest in Roman history. He rode in a golden chariot drawn by 8 horses. At his side was a captive king and queen of Pontus. Behind them paraded 100 senators, followed by thousands of soldiers carrying 2,000 standards taken from the enemy. But Caesar's greatness was his downfall. His growing popularity threatened the traditional power of the elites. Led by Caesar's own son-in-law, Marcus Junius Brutus, a group of senators assassinated Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BC. The conspirators believed they were saving the Republic, but in doing so, they destroyed it. Caesar's adopted son Octavian went to war against them. Known to history as Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, went to war against the assassins. Known to history as Augustus, he emerged victorious, and with that victory, the Roman Republic ceased to exist. Instead, Rome became an empire ruled by a princeps, a first citizen, who was both the head of the government and the head of the state. The new system of rule combined the power of kingship with the consent of the governed, creating a position so powerful that it required a new word to describe it: emperor. Augustus enjoyed a long and successful reign. He presided over a golden age in Roman culture and peace known as the Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. During his rule and that of his successors, the Julio-Claudians, the empire reached its greatest extent. In 14 AD, Tiberius inherited the throne from his uncle, the Emperor Augustus. Unlike Augustus, Tiberius preferred isolation and left the government largely to his advisors. When he died, the empire fell into chaos. A series of rapid and unpopular emperors destabilized the government, and the army grew discontented. In 68 AD, Galba was assassinated after only 7 months in office. He was succeeded by Otho, who was in turn defeated by Vitellius. Civil war broke out. 4 emperors in 4 years. Amidst this chaos, the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, executed Jesus. In 69 AD, a general named Vespasian ended the civil war, seized power, and established the Flavian dynasty. But the Julio-Claudians and the Flavians were only the beginning. Over the course of the next 180 years, 27 emperors held power, 13 of whom were murdered. Caligula was infamous for his cruelty and insanity. He chained women to chariots like horses and whipped them as they pulled him around. He hosted feasts inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. He chained women to chariots like horses and whipped them as they pulled him around. Nero fiddled as Rome burned. Titus destroyed Jerusalem. Domitian created a personality cult around himself and unleashed terror across the empire. Yet amidst all this madness, life went on. Roads and aqueducts were constructed, the Colosseum was completed, trade and agriculture flourished, the provinces thrived, cities rose, people lived. Rome conquered the ancient world. In 117 AD, Emperor Trajan, the last of the 5 good emperors, conquered Dacia, Mesopotamia, and parts of modern Ukraine, and annexed them to the empire. But these victories pushed Rome too far. Military recruitment was impossible. Soldiers deserted, and revolts broke out across the empire. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, focused on consolidating rather than expanding. He traveled extensively and reorganized the administration. He compiled a new legal code, built public works, and sponsored literary and artistic projects. His was a peaceful reign, but a dangerous one, because peace had brought wealth to the provinces and the prosperity bred discontent. Throughout the 2nd century, Rome experienced a series of violent revolts, including the Antonine Plague, a pandemic that may have killed millions. By the 3rd century, the empire was in chaos. 9 emperors held power in a span of 40 years, 6 of whom died violently. In 235, Elagabalus, the spoiled teenager who succeeded his grandfather, Alexander Severus, was murdered by his own grandmother, Julia Maesa. Anarchy engulfed Rome. Soldiers seized control and made the weakest emperor puppet to their whims. Governors, generals, and even women meddled in imperial affairs. Meanwhile, the frontier was coming under increasing pressure from Germanic tribes in the north and the Sasanian Persians in the east. By 284, the empire was in sharp decline. The army was no longer Roman. Of 200,000 legionaries, only 10,000 were Italian. The provinces had been drained of resources, and Diocletian decided to divide the empire in half, making his court at Nicomedia in Bithynia, while his co-emperor Maximian ruled the west from Milan. Despite the division, the empire continued to contract. In 305, Diocletian abdicated. 3 years later, Rome was sacked by the Goths. By 324, only one emperor remained, Constantine I. That year, he defeated his rival Licinius and reunited the empire. He reformed the administration, the army, and the currency. He built a new capital at Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople, and he legalized Christianity, ending the persecution of Christians throughout the empire. Constantine ushered in the new Rome. In the east, despite the empire being smaller than ever, Rome had endured. The Western Empire, however, was crumbling. In the 4th century, Rome suffered wave after wave of barbarian invasions. In 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome. Rome had never before been sacked by an invading force. In 455, the Vandals did it again. In 476, the Germanic chief, Theodoric the Great, deposed Romulus Augustulus, a 15-year-old boy. The Western Empire was no more. So ends the story of the empire that ruled the world. With a single blow, but 1,000 slow wounds. Rome teaches us that even the greatest of empires must adapt to survive, and that those who build their legacy on swords will one day fall beneath them. Thanks for watching.